7%. That's the first number you need to know about the Stanford GSB. Why? Because 7% is the acceptance rate at Stanford, and that makes it the toughest MBA program to gain acceptance to in the world. So what stats do you need to get into such a competitive program? Well, before we get into the numbers, you of course need to know two things. One, stats alone don't get you in. They just mean that you can be part of the conversation. Two, the admissions committee accepts human beings, not numbers, meaning there is more to your candidacy than your stats. That being said, let's take a look at the range of stats among test scores, undergraduate GPA, and work experience, and more that make you competitive at the GSB. Of course, these are just ranges. Each year, there are applicants that get in with numbers below these ranges, and many with numbers above these ranges don't get in. So, is the table set? Good. Let's start with a question that many ponder. GMAT versus GRE, which one should I take? After about 15 years of B schools accepting the GRE, some applicants still think that taking the GRE indicates weakness and that the GMAT is the real test. Well, what does the GSB have to say about that? We have no preference between GMAT and GRE exams. If you still don't believe them, how about some data? 58% of GSB admits took the GMAT and 42% took the GRE. Plenty of applicants get in with the GRE. No bias to speak of. So pick the test that best suits your abilities and interests. You can do that by taking practice exams from our friends at Manhattan Prep, powered by Kaplan. Let's dig a little deeper into the GSB's GRE expectations. The average GRE verbal score for an admit is 163. The average GRE quant score is 164. Most programs offer narrower 80% ranges to give you guidance for what a competitive score might be. The GSB instead offers the full range of verbal scores, which isn't that helpful because they can have one or two outliers that throw off the entire scale. So their full range is 152 to 170 verbal and 153 to 170 quant. Now that doesn't mean that anyone can get in with a 152 verbal, 153 quant combination, and it is quite possible that no one got in with that combination. The individual with the 152 verbal may have gotten a 167 on the quant, or a 170 or a 162, we don't know. The individual with the 153 quant might have gotten in with a 168 verbal. You get the drift. I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you. Let's take a deep breath for a moment. Honestly, we haven't learned that much. We have an average, but no meaningful range. Our estimate from working with many candidates is that the thickest part of the admit curve at the GSB is a 160 to 166 on both sides of the test. But again, a 160-160 is different than a 160/166. So as a minimum, we suggest that you aim for a 320 total score to be in range. But of course, many will need to do better than being in range to be admitted. If you are over a 166 average or a 332 combined score, you're in a comfortable place statistically, but will need to shine throughout your application regardless. Dizzy yet? We've only talked about the GRE. Let's talk about the GMAT. Yes, the old GMAT is still the score that the GSB publishes. They did not have enough GMAT focus data to share in this class profile. The GSB's current GMAT average is 738, and its full and largely unhelpful range is 560 to 790. One thing we can tell you is that there aren't many 560s in a GSB class. Our guess is that there is one, maybe two, and that one or that second person is a distinctly singular applicant, not an overrepresented consultant or PE applicant, for example, we assure you. Based on our own applicants, we see a clustering around the 720 to 760 range, but that isn't a score that you can get today since the classic GMAT is no longer offered. So what does this mean in new GMAT terms, GMAT focus terms? Perusing GMAT's conversion table, you're targeting a 665 to 725 to be in a comfortable GMAT range. Okay, we're a few minutes in here, and we haven't even talked about your GPA. The average for an individual attending a 4.0 scaled university is a 3.75 GPA, and thanks GSB, surprise, no range provided. It's very rare to see anyone getting in with anything less than a 3, and a 3.0 to 3.2 is pretty rare as well. You're certainly not in a safe place with a 3.3, but a 3.4 starts to get you into the thicker part of the curve. Still, you have to remember that we're discussing stats in isolation, and your stats work together. If you have that 3.4, you're below the average. If you complement that with a 320 GRE, you're on the bottom part of the acceptable range in both of these areas, and together, you're not in a danger zone, but you certainly have an uphill battle because many will have better stats than you. You'll have to really stand out in all of the other parts of your application, namely the qualitative pieces, to have any chance at all. You'll have to be a real standout applicant. But we aren't really here to discuss the qualitative. There are more stats yet. Well, here's one that should hearten some. 78 domestic and 97 international undergraduate programs are represented in the GSB class. So the GSB isn't a confirmation society for Stanford grads and Ivy Leaguers. There'll be individuals from schools you have never heard of guaranteed in the GSB's class. Similarly, 72 countries are represented, 39% of the class is international, and 44% of the class is female. Our guess is that the GSB would like to achieve gender parity, and we would encourage strong female candidates in particular to ignore that 7% acceptance rate and go for it. As they say, you miss 100% of the shots you do not take. Without going to the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision, the GSB definitely wants to maintain a diverse class, and they're finding diversity in a roundabout way by identifying applicants who are first-gen college grads. 12% of its class is first-gen. If you're from this group, definitely identify yourself as such. And the most recent admitted class is 8% African American and 7% Latino. It's somewhat remarkable that 0% of the class is Native American, Alaskan, Pacific Islander. While the GSB can't ask you about your identity, you can find ways to share how your identity has informed values or decision-making in your essays, resume, interviews, and more. You can let them know. We discussed this at length in On Track by mbaMission, our on-demand application platform. I lead you through how to write your diversity statements and how to share your identity in other areas. It's important. Please check it out. Well, what comes next in terms of stats? Well, more stats, of course. The average matriculant to the GSB has 5 years of work experience. If you have 8, you're still in the game. If you have a very productive 8. If you have 2, well, it's going to be a challenge, but if you can really reveal true outperformance, the door may just open. Do your best to stand out in your positions, whatever they may be. Still, if you're from an underrepresented profession, the military, for example, comprises 5% of the class, you may stand a little taller if you happen to outperform your group. So, you just got a ton of stats. We've covered a lot of ground. Let's try to sum this up. Please know that this is still an oversimplification because low performance in one area, even within these narrow bands, likely requires outperformance somewhere else. Still, if your GPA is a 3.4 or higher, if you have a GMAT Classic of 720 to 760, GMAT Focus of 665 to 725, or a 320 or higher GRE score, you're likely in a statistical range that will allow you to start to differentiate yourself via those qualitative metrics. And if you're a woman, a first-gen applicant, a higher performer from an underrepresented profession or even country, you may have a small edge and may stand out from this competitive crowd. The bottom line is that much of your application is defined by what you have done. You need to tell your story, and through On Track by mbaMission, you'll have the opportunity to go through customized lessons on all of the components of an application. I guide you through essay and personal statement construction, including wonderful examples from the GSB as teaching aids, how to craft your resume, how to interview your target schools with the recorded interview simulation. It's so vast and so powerful, poets and quants called it the most comprehensive admissions resource ever created. Check it out. And if you want more stats videos, check out our What Stats You Need to Get into HBS now.